Now let's move on to the table of authorities. As I mentioned earlier, you can't do this step until the end of your writing process. The table of contents was different. Since we know at the outset what our section headings will be, it's possible to set up our table of contents at the beginning when we have a blank document by typing and marking out those headings. You can't do that for the table of authorities because the content that you're marking, your citations, that's much more dynamic. You really need to write and edit the whole document first, and only then do you have content to mark. As a model, I am again using the appellant's brief in Morgan v. Circuit Court, so let's turn to the table of authorities from the filed version of that brief. I wanted to highlight a few things at the outset. First, the table organizes authorities by category. Word has a default list of categories, but here the attorneys broke things into 3 categories: cases, Wisconsin law, and other sources. And you have some flexibility to choose the categories that work the best for your particular case, but there's one big caveat for that. The rules of appellate procedure, both state and federal, explicitly mention 3 categories for the table of authorities. There's cases, arranged alphabetically, statutes, and other authorities. So you'll definitely want to take the rules of appellate procedure as your starting point. But sometimes when you have a ton of authority, attorneys will break things up even more. For example, you might take the case category and split it between a category of Wisconsin cases and then a separate category of federal cases. Now, going back to our categories in this brief, I'm going to be honest, I do not love this middle category, the Wisconsin law category, because I find it misleading. Wisconsin cases are also Wisconsin law, but those are going to go in the cases category. So I don't think the Wisconsin law title effectively captures what follows. If you look at what's listed here, it's just Wisconsin statutes and court rules, so I'd be inclined to call this category Wisconsin statutes and court rules. The second thing you notice is there are no pin sites for the cases. The point of this table is to capture every appearance of a particular case, so including the full citation to the entire case. This is going to require us to play with things a bit to remove the pin sites when we mark the citations in the brief. And I can already see a typo in this table related to that process. The second case, United States v. Crichton, there's a comma after the page number in the citation. I'm sure that's a leftover from when there had been a pin site. I will show you how to remove the pin sites as you mark your citations, at which point you should avoid little nits like this. Finally, notice here that one of the statutes cited is section 802.21, and then immediately after that it lists 802.21 1A, 1B, 4, and 6. I find that to be completely unnecessary. The first cite to 801.21 really captures the rest. You don't need more than that, so I would say let's cut these. And doing that is going to make the coding easier when we're going through the brief. This also relates to a point my students made in looking at some other briefs. They marveled at how many authorities were cited. And one thing I said in response is that when you put everything in the table of authorities, it can make it look like you have more authorities than you had realized in the first place. But this also is one example of how certain ways of formatting the table of authorities can end up stretching things out unnecessarily. And to give you a point of comparison, this is the table of authorities for the state's brief in that same case. Here there are just 2 categories, cases and statutes, and everything fits on one page, so it's a lot shorter. Of course, I do notice, though, that this party also listed the same statute multiple times with section 59.20 and then again with 801.21. I obviously disagree with this, but perhaps I'm in the minority here, given that both parties for this case did it the way that I'm suggesting you not do it. So you should follow the guidance of your professor for this class, and when you're practicing, just be conscious of the expectations for whatever jurisdiction you're practicing in. With that, I think we are ready to begin. Okay, now I'm back to working on the Word version of the Morgan v. Circuit Court brief. You should also have a copy of this document in Word. If you had followed along in the previous video on making the table of contents, you should already have your own table of contents for this brief. That didn't come with the version of the document that you received. You would have had to have generated that yourself. Now, with this video, you should follow along and mark things in this document the same way that I'm doing. Hopefully you're watching this well in advance of the due date for your brief, so you can learn these steps in a relaxed time frame without a ton of time pressure. But of course, if you are doing this last minute, just take a deep breath and follow these steps. Instead of following along with your version of this brief, you can just do it with the brief that you've already written and that's basically in a nearly final form other than finalizing the tables. Now, in order to start, we're going to click on References up here, and then all the way on the right there's a spot for Table of Authorities. The command we need is this one here for Mark Citation. This allows us to mark all of the citations, which alerts Word that these citations should go into the Table of Authorities. This is similar to the process of marking headings for the table of contents, but as you'll see, this is a bit more complicated. Another point, you'll want to click on the home screen, this paragraph symbol, the show hide command, because that will show all of the hidden coding. And you'll see it'll show a lot of coding will appear for the once you've marked the citations. Going back to the layout page, the references page, and then Mark Citation, I want to show you one more thing, what to do if you want to add categories beyond the categories that already exist here. If you click on category, you see that Word already has the basic categories: cases, statutes, other authorities, the ones that are explicitly referenced in the rules of appellate procedure. Plus, there are some other categories: rules, treatises, regulations. You might want additional categories. If you do, just click on category here, and then this edit category window shows up. And you can just, where you see numbers appear, you can click on the number. That's just a placeholder to be able to add additional category. I could type under replace with, I could type the name of a new category. If I wanted to say I have a federal cases category, I could do that and click OK, and that would add that category. I'm fine with the categories that are here, so I'm just going to cancel out because I don't need to do that. And now I'm ready to mark citations, so I'm just going to go to the beginning of the substance of the brief, statement of issues for review. This is on page 1. I'm going to go up, again under references, table of authorities. I'm going to click Mark Citation. And when I hit Next Citation, now Word is going to automatically look for citations. It does this by looking for a few things. If it finds the V symbol, V period for cases, it also will look for the section symbol, as you see it's done here to find statutes. I think there might be other things it looks for as well, like years in parentheses. This protocol of just clicking Next Citation, it's not going to find everything. For example, short forms of cases don't have the V. There are other authorities that don't have a V or a section symbol. So you'll eventually have to manually go through this to capture any citations that are missed. Before I start demonstrating, let's just quickly go over the steps of the process. The preliminary steps, as I've already shown you, first you would go click on Mark Citation under the Table of Authorities tab, and then when this window shows up, you would click Next Citation to start proceeding from one citation to the next. Once Next Citation finds a citation, take your cursor and highlight the complete citation that you wanted to flag. The next point, you pull it into the table by clicking in this box here. Click inside the selected text box, and as soon as you click inside that box, the citation will appear there. You'll see that in a second when I demonstrate. Third, you need to adjust the citation by removing the pin sites, and remember to also remove any comma associated with the pin site. So you'd remove the pin site in that selected text box. Then the next step, you need to select the appropriate category of authority. It might automatically show the right category. In this case, it showed cases, and that was right, but you could click on category and change that if necessary. Fifth step, you would mark the citation by clicking Mark, and that will cause the code to appear in the text. It's code that would otherwise be hidden, but then you'll see if you had clicked on that paragraph symbol that unhides the code. The last step, you will move on by clicking Next Citation. And you'll just keep going through that process as you go through the whole brief. Now, one other thing I want to flag, you're not only marking authority that appears for the first time, you'll be marking if there are subsequent references to the same authority, you want to mark that again, because the whole point of the table of authorities is to identify every time a particular authority appears. So if you've already marked something once, when you mark it a second or a third time, you want to reconnect to that original marking of the original citation. And so that means that your first two steps will be the same, but you don't need to adjust the citation by removing the pin, and you don't select the appropriate category. Instead, you're going to select the previous reference, which is down here in that box. So if I had a second reference to WSStat 809.23 and all those subsections, I will go and I will click within this box the previous reference to that, and that will link them, and then again I will click Mark Citation, and then I'll move on by clicking Next Citation. Now I'm going to do this with my actual documents. I'm starting at the beginning of the substantive part of the brief, clicking Mark Citation, Next Citation. This pulls up the first reference to WSStat section 809.23. I highlight the whole citation. Then I pull it in by clicking within this box. Now I want to adjust it. I had mentioned eliminating pin sites, but also anything that you want to do to adjust the way this is going to appear in the table. You will do that here in this selected text window. So as I explained earlier in the video, I only want to reference 809.23. I don't need all these subsections, so I'm going to delete those. And that's really how I want this to appear in the table. Next step, I'm going to select the appropriate category. It's not cases, it's statutes. And I have to mark the citation, so I'll do that by clicking Mark. And now I'm going to go on to the next citation. You can see now all this coding appears immediately after the statute. And that's something, again, that's only visible if you've clicked that paragraph symbol. So I'm going to click Next Citation. Brings me to reference to a different provision of the Wisconsin statutes. So I'm going to highlight that, click within selected text to pull it in. It correctly identified it as a statute. There's nothing else that I need to adjust within there. I'm going to mark it, and then I'll click Next Citation. And the next citation we have here now, this is another reference to WSStat section 809.23. So I'm going to highlight the whole thing as I did before. I'm going to pull it in, but I'm not going to adjust the citation at all. Instead, I'm just going to click on the previous appearance of that statute, because again, this is the second reference to it. So I'm going to click on the second reference, and you see down here where it lists long citation. This shows you the way the citation will appear in the table. It feels a little odd to describe this as a long citation when actually this is shorter than the version that appears here where it says short citation, but that's just how Microsoft Word describes that. So I've connected this second reference to the citation to the previous appearance to it. So I'm just going to click Mark, and I'm going to move on to the next citation. Now I have a case. I'm going to highlight this case. I'm going to pull it in by clicking on with selected text. I'm going to adjust the citation by removing the pin sites. This one has a couple of pin sites, so I'll be sure to also remove the commas. Category, this is a case, not a statute, so I will change the category. I'm going to click Mark Citation to mark that, and then I'm going to click Next Citation. And you see here, this identified this case. This case doesn't have a V and it doesn't have a section symbol, but Word was able to recognize this as a case because it had this here. So I'm going to highlight the whole thing. I'm going to pull it in by clicking here within selected text. If I need to adjust it, I will, and this also has a couple of pin sites I need to remove. So I'm going to remove those pin sites. This properly describes it as a case, so we don't need to adjust the category. I'm going to click Mark, and then you can continue to do this by saying Next Citation. I'm going to close out of here because there's one other thing I want to show you. Up to this point, I've been illustrating how to find citations by clicking Mark Citation and then going through by clicking Next Citation so that Word is automatically finding citations. But as I mentioned, sometimes Word won't automatically find a citation, so you'll also need to manually go through the document to mark things. And here's one example. This Wisconsin Circuit Court Access Oversight Committee final report that wasn't picked up by Word, so I'm just going to go through and highlight it. And the way you do this manually, it allows you to skip a step essentially because you're highlighting the citation first and then you click Mark Citation. So it's actually already been pulled into the selected text box, so I don't need to take that additional step. But I'm still going to go through and remove any pin site. I don't need this reference to the page, so I'm going to cut that. I'm going to identify the category. We're going to call this Other Authorities. And then all I have to do is click Mark to mark that citation. And then since I'm doing this manually, I can just click Close because now I'll continue to go through the document manually to find anything that hadn't been picked up by clicking Next Citation. Okay, so I put you on pause and I went through and I marked all of the rest of the citations in the brief. It took about 10 or 15 minutes. It was pretty tedious, but now that's done. And you can see, again, when you go through the brief, all the coding just showing up after all of the citations, like we have here. If we go back to the home screen and click this paragraph symbol, all that coding will disappear. So it's not stuff that's going to show up in your final version of the brief. It's just the hidden coding that Microsoft Word is ultimately going to use to generate your table of authorities. So now let's try generating the table itself. I'm just going to show you the way it looks when we generate it the first time without adjusting anything. So I'm going to where I included my table of authorities, putting the cursor down here below it, clicking References, Table of Authorities. I'm going to say Insert Table of Authorities. And if I made mistakes, and I probably did, this will highlight those mistakes. And I'm just going to click OK, and we'll see the way it appears automatically. And actually, this isn't too bad. Let me just remove the space up here. Cases, statutes, other authorities. Frankly, I think this looks quite good. I'm pretty impressed with myself. You can see the page numbers all the way on the side. The cases, they're organized alphabetically. I'm trying to see, one thing that I'll look for, I'll see if there are multiple references to the same case. For example, if I forgot to catch, or if I neglected to catch a short form and I instead coded it as an original version of a case. But I don't see any examples where I had done that. Similarly with the statutes, and again, I'd probably rename this statutes and court rules. But looks like I have everything there, and then we have the other authorities. The only thing that I don't like is that the cases here and the page numbers, they're all in kind of wonky font. I want it all to be a consistent font. So I'm just going to undo this. I'm going to go back to Insert Table of Authorities. So here if I click Modify, and then it's giving me Table of Authority heading. Let's modify again, and it's Calibri Light. I'm going to change it to Times New Roman. I think everything else was 13, so let's just say 13, say OK, OK again, and now let's see what happens when I click OK and it generates the table. And now everything looks good except the page numbers are still in that font that I don't want. So I clicked Undo to get rid of the table, and I'm going to go back to Insert Table of Authorities. The one other thing I think I need to change, I'll click Modify. I hadn't changed this here, Table of Authorities, so I'll click Modify here. Again, change this to Times New Roman 13. I'm hopeful that once I do that, then the page numbers will also be in Times New Roman, and in fact they are. So here we are again with a well-formatted Table of Authorities, so I am excited about this. The one thing I wanted to note, sometimes the easiest way to make adjustments is to just go in here and adjust something in here. And you can absolutely do that. Let's say, the name of this case was actually City of something else. You can make those changes. But the problem is, once you've made those changes, then you need to be conscious of that when you go back to update the table. And likewise, I might just want to change statutes here to statutes and other and court rules, or statutes and other authority, something like that. And just be conscious, if you make changes like that and then later on you update the table, those changes might disappear. Because you will want to update the table if you've made any edits after the first time you ran the table, because the page numbers, for example, might adjust. So you click on the table and then you right click and you say update field, then that will update the contents of the table. So you click update field, and now that actually changed the name of this case back to what it originally was. Same thing here. I changed it to statutes and court rules. If I say update field, now statutes is back to normal. So if you've made any changes by going directly into the table of authorities, just be conscious of that, because you will lose those changes at a later point if you go to update the field in the table. And likewise, the same thing with the table of contents. You would right click and say update field if there are any changes, and the table of contents give you the option of updating page numbers only or updating the entire table. So if you did make adjustments to the language that appears in the table of contents, you could say update page numbers only, and hopefully it would leave that in place. But just be aware of that if you make any changes in the table itself. Finally, I just wanted to go back to the suggestion box that I'd posted earlier. Please visit go.wisc.edu/7b4g7c if you have any tricks about using Microsoft Word, about formatting a brief, formatting a table that are different from what I suggested here. I'm certainly no expert, as I mentioned before. I'm sure many of you have better approaches. I would love to hear from you because I can incorporate that into future versions of this, and also, if it would be helpful, you could try to circulate it to everybody. Thank you so much for listening. I created this video for all the sections of legal research and writing, but as you know, different professors have different preferences, so obviously everyone listen to what your professor is instructing you to do. This video is really just a foundation and some basic reasons why paying attention to tables is important, and also instruction on how you can put the tables together. With that, I'm done. So thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day.